violence and gun violence, and then how do we plan to address it going forward, to give you some basic outline as to how we plan to address it. As you know, Cleveland is really a reflection of what's going on throughout the country. There's an uptick. As a matter of fact, President Biden has called it a pandemic in and of itself. The homicides, if you add them up every day, the number of people who have died as a result of violence, gun violence in particular, he called it a pandemic, and I happen to agree. And so, as a matter of fact, you look at over the last 30 days, there's been almost 50 what they classified as mass shootings. That's 50. There used to be a time when you had one, and it would be something unusual. Now there's 50 in 30 days or less. And so Cleveland is really a part of this national trend towards violence, particularly violence with guns. And also it is Cleveland, just like all local communities, have to deal with whatever the impact of national and state policies. So as national state policies are set, then they play themselves out in local community, and we wind up having to deal with them. And around guns in particular. Now, in the midst of all of this going on, whether it's carjacking, robberies, homicides, felonious assaults, all of this stuff, we have police officers who are responding to calls, or they just happen to ride up on an incident in progress. And this almost invariably will result in police use of force, and sometimes deadly force. The question becomes is whether or not that use of force, particularly deadly force, was justified or was it not justified? Example is just recently, there were, in Cleveland, we had a DA officer who was used force, deadly force, and we had a Cleveland police officer use of deadly force in the southeast side of Cleveland. CMHA a few months ago, there was a use of deadly force in one of its public housing estates. So this whole playing out of crime, the uptick of crime, and the violence associated with that, and police interaction with the people is causing a lot of things to happen, not just in Cleveland, but across the nation. Give you an example with Cleveland and the uptick. Last year was a record year for Cleveland in terms of homicides. We are already 12 homicides over where we were at the same time last year, and last year was a record year in terms of homicides. I believe we're at 47 now, and we were at 35 last year, and the year is not half over yet. So that is the magnitude of crime, particularly violent crimes associated with guns in the city of Cleveland. And as I said, really reflecting a mirror of what's going on throughout the country. Another very specific type of crime that is occurring is carjacking. And almost all the time when we have carjacking, we have the use of guns. It's a robbery. If a weapon is involved, it's an aggravated robbery. The chief will tell you about some of the ones that we have solved and the ones that are currently in progress. And we'll be asking for your help and assistance in regards to some outstanding ones that are going on where we have identified some suspects. So he will be talking to you about that. So what I'll do is I'm going to introduce Director Howard, who will have a brief statement, and then he will introduce the chief, and the chief will be a little bit more specific in terms of what actions we plan to take, what we're already doing, and additional things that we will be doing as the year progresses, all with the effort of a reduction in crime, particularly violent crime. Director Howe.
Thank you, Mayor. Cleveland. In 2020, like urban centers across the country, we saw a sharp rise in violent crimes and homicides. Homicides were up more than 20% nationally in 2020, and this trend is continuing into 2021, and current statistics, especially regarding gun violence, are alarming. This national phenomena, which we feel intimately here at home, cannot be resolved with simplistic or just local explanations, as the mayor stated earlier. Simultaneously, this year, since 2020, we have been met with challenges to police, protective measures and constraints to combat a pandemic, and a surge in the use of firearms. As gun availability increases, we see a higher percentage of crimes committed with guns. Nationally, more than 10% of guns seized last year by ATF were used within 6 months of purchasing to commit crimes. In order to address violent crime in our city, the Division of Police is implementing a plan for increased strategic presence and traffic enforcement. We have instituted a daily violent crime task force to operate throughout the neighborhoods. We have initiated investigations into numerous gangs identified as violent. And just today, we had a successful roundup of major drug traffickers, making our city safer. Our combined response to violent crime is made up of district vice units, the NICE and gang impact units, and the Bureau of Traffic Enforcement. However, even these efforts need support from the public. As we work to make Cleveland safer, we are asking that the public do so with us. If you know something, say something. If you see something, say something. Anonymous information can be provided by calling 216-25-CRIME. With that, I will turn it over to Police Chief Calvin Williams for more detail.
Thanks, Director. I'm going to just recap a few things from the mayor and the director. I won't go over all of it, but they basically ran down the situation that we're in here today in the city of Cleveland. Crime is up, violent crime specifically here in the city, with the exception of robberies. They're down, which we're grateful for, and the efforts of our men and women out there in our community in keeping robberies down. But homicides, as the mayor stated, we're up by 12 compared to the same period last year and in 2019 also. And then felonious assaults, we're hovering around about 400 shootings in the city. Some enforcement stats to really talk about to kind of give you a better picture of the magnitude of what we're facing here. Our gun confiscations are up 100% compared to the same time period last year. Last year, we confiscated a little over 400 weapons off the streets of the city of Cleveland from January to the first couple weeks in April. This year, we've confiscated over 800 guns off the city streets. And as the mayor again stated, we're not even halfway through the year yet. The director talked a little bit about our violent crime enforcement strategy, and I'm not going to get into real detail about it, but we have all hands on deck throughout the city at every level, federal, state, county, and local, that are trying to combat the issue that we have here in the city of Cleveland, and as also was stated earlier, around the country in relationship to violent crime. Our task force officers, as the director stated, conduct operations daily. One of those operations resulted in the arrest just today of 11 individuals involved in a drug trafficking operation here in the city. We have multiple investigations going on in all parts of the city as it relates to gun violence, drug activity, and violent activity here in the city. But again, we can't do it by ourselves. We can't arrest our way out of the things that are happening out here. So we definitely ask the public's help with any information on violence that's occurring in your area, folks that you know are involved in that particular violence. Give us that information so that we can actually take action to make our community safer. The mayor also talked a little bit about some of the challenges for law enforcement in enforcing the laws to try to make our city safer, to try to get guns off the streets. And unfortunately, our officers encounter folks that have weapons and are willing to use those weapons, be it against citizens or officers. We've had 2 of those cases here most recently in the last week and a half. DEA agent and then one of our own. And we put out the video related to both of those shootings soon after they happened. And again, when I talked about the shooting involving our officer this past Friday, I asked the community to take these incidents as single incidents in and of themselves. Look at the exact facts within that incident before you make up your mind and judgment as to what happened, as to who's right and who's wrong in that incident. I also asked the public not to add in things that happen around the country that have no relationship to the actions taken here in the city of Cleveland by folks here in the city and officers here in the city. And that's why we pushed that video out as soon as we got it. So I, again, ask for the public's help in identifying folks that perpetrate violence on our community, because our officers will respond and take action against that. I ask for help in, those folks that are out there committing crimes. Stop it. Put your weapons down. Nothing comes of a weapon in the hand of somebody that shouldn't have it. So, we're asking for everybody to be involved in this endeavor, because it's something that is not unique to Cleveland, but, we're concerned about here in this city, in Northeast Ohio, and what affects us day in and day out. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the mayor.
Chief, before we open it up for general questions, let me ask the question that I know someone's going to ask, and that is, could you give us a little bit more specifics in terms of the strategy moving forward, and who will be our partners? I know you talked about our federal partners, the recent drug arrest, so that I imagine was conducted with our federal partners. We'll be working with other agencies. Give us a little bit more information around specifically what will be happening with the various units and our partners as we move into the summer.
Yes, some of the specifics, we have increased our staffing and all the units that are out there patrolling our cities and actually directly combating violent crime, be it our NICE unit, our Neighborhood Enforcement Community Engagement unit, our task force officers who are on task force operations for all the federal agencies, the FBI, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the Drug Enforcement Administration, as well as U.S. Marshals, Customs, our Homeland Security folks, you name it. Our State Patrol folks are partners, not just in violent crime, but in trying to combat an issue. Again, it's a nationwide issue of fatal motor vehicle crashes. We had one just the other day here in the city of Cleveland. So things like that. Our own Bureau of Traffic is basically coordinating that with both our state partners and the State Patrol, and as well as some of our local partners, in combating that thing that is taking lives every day. We haven't talked about the opioid crisis and continuing to have folks overdose. Overdose deaths far exceed the number of homicide deaths that happen in the city. We have a dedicated unit that investigates those crimes, and again, tries to bring folks to justice that have committed those crimes, sold those drugs to folks that have overdosed on those drugs. So it's a comprehensive strategy. It involves, again, state, federal, local, county partners, as well as all the resources of the Division of Police. Those task force operations communicate on a daily basis with our district operations and the district commanders, violent crime response teams that are out in each and every district. We basically want to hit this with everything we can. We started this towards the beginning of the year, and we're going to continue to up those resources, both personnel resources, technology resources, which we haven't really gotten deep into, as well as our partnerships, and leverage all that to decrease violent crime here in the city of Cleveland.
And that is on the enforcement side. On the prevention side, we're still uh, working with our trauma coaches in our rec center. We're looking at, as we invest some stimulus dollars into our local communities to stimulate our economy, to create jobs, working with school system to enhance educational opportunities. So those things take a little bit longer in order to really bleed into the system where you can actually see the effects and the impact of it. Today we're talking about the enforcement side, but we are working on this not just through law enforcement, but also on the causal, the things that cause people to commit crime or the causes of the violent activities out in the street. So with that, we'll open it up for questions.
The first question is from Kristen Mazur from Channel 19.
Mm-hmm.
What's being done to deal with the carjacking problem throughout the city?
I'll let the chief answer that. As a matter of fact, we will be giving you some information right after this press event so that you can help us in that regard. But Chief will talk about things that we've done, things crimes that we've resolved, but then those things that are still out there.
Yeah, to answer that question, a lot of the things that we're doing now are things that we've done in the past, things that work. Carjacking usually is a crime of opportunity, meaning those folks that want to commit that crime basically drive around until they see what they think is an easy victim, and then they perpetrate that crime. So what our detectives do is they look at those patterns, they look definitely at those areas where we're having carjackings, and then they deploy resources to basically surveil those areas. We also have, of course, a process when vehicles are recovered to recover any scientific evidence from those vehicles, be it fingerprints, DNA, things like that, are items or articles left behind by those perpetrating those crimes. And then, of course, our public, if your, 16, 18, 20-year-old son comes home with a brand new vehicle they didn't buy, then we should be getting a call. I mean, these vehicles don't just disappear in our neighborhoods. They're parked in driveways and on streets and sometimes behind abandoned houses and things like that, and we need to get those calls. We have some technology pieces that we're putting together, and it's kind of early on in that, so I'm not going to get specific, some surveillance tips, along with the camera system that we place throughout the city and adding to that. But the biggest thing that we're doing is making sure that we have adequate resources. District commanders, when they don't think they can solve that issue, they ask for additional resources, and those resources are brought to bear. In this particular case, we have some suspects, at least pictures, to be able to identify folks that we're going to push out there at the end of this, and we're asking the public's help in identifying these folks. One of the other issues that comes up in violent crime enforcement, and it has since the pandemic started, is, of course, COVID has limited the ability of all levels of government to do daily operations and to the capacity that they did before the pandemic. That includes our jails, and unfortunately, some folks get let out of jail that shouldn't get let out of jail, and they reoffend. So I'm hoping that we are getting to the point where definitely violent offenders are kept in jail as long as possible to go through the adjudication process so that they don't go out there and reoffend before they can answer to the charges that they're in jail for now. So there's a lot that we're doing, but the main thing is the public's help in identifying these folks, these vehicles. We know the locations. We're doing our due diligence in those areas with First District resources and additional resources, as well as some of the things that we really can't talk too deeply about right now.
And I want to remind everyone that your question is about Cleveland because this is a Cleveland press event, but crime doesn't respect borders. And you could, and I'm pretty sure that in many of our suburban communities, they see a significant increase in violence and a significant increase in carjacking. Many times those events wind up being in Cleveland because the way in which our highway system works and all of that. But it's a major issue, carjacking, not just in the urban center, but in our neighboring suburbs. It's a major issue.
Okay, Mayor. We have 3 questions from Sid Standifer. He's a freelance journalist.
Mm-hmm.
The first question is, how is increased traffic enforcement meant to combat gun crimes?
First question, I don't know if you heard it, but how does increased traffic enforcement help to combat gun crime? It's amazing. If I were someone who was carrying a gun and wasn't supposed to have one, or if I was someone with a felony warrant, or if I were someone with some drugs in the car, I would obey every traffic law that there is. You wouldn't catch me at all. But it's amazing how many times people will actually run a red light, speed, run stop signs, and have traffic violation, have expired plates, all these types of things. And when they are stopped, it's determined that there's a warrant for the driver, or there is a gun that is in the car, and is the person who has possession of that gun should not have the gun. So it is something that can be done in order to keep people on their toes, meaning the people who are out there committing crime, keep them on their toes, and to make sure that people understand you just can't violate the law, no matter how minor the infraction is. Now, that being said, there is a distinct responsibility of police officers when they're doing that, particularly in the environment in which we're in, to conduct themselves in a way that is in line with their training and with the protocol of how you should behave in regards to traffic stops that protects the officer and the person driving the car. So there, that is why you see a lot of incidents happening now around traffic stops, because there are many people who wind up being stopped who have warrants, who have guns, who have drugs, and in that way, it does help in the ability to confiscate that gun. When that gun is confiscated, many times you will find that that gun may be tied to other crimes that have been committed. So, Chief, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, Mayor, you hit it.
Okay.
His second question is, who identified the targeted gangs as violent and how?
I'll let the chief, who identifies the targeted gang as violent and how, I'll let the chief answer that because every gang, we usually say gang has a connotation of violence and crime, but you could have gangs that are not necessarily that way. It's just the connotation of a gang. I guess we call them something else, association or whatever you might call it. But Chief, you want to answer?
Categorizing a gang or a group as violent is a combination. It's a combination of evidence by members that are in that group, gang, organization that we know have committed crimes, that have criminal records, and that we suspect of current crimes. It's a combination also of our folks in the community giving us the information as to the activities of that gang. And there are some investigative tools that we use to take a closer look at the folks associated with that or who claim that gang. And it's rather easily determined that this is a violent gang, and we go after them, with everything we can to get them off our streets, to keep people safe.
And his third question is, which drugs were people picked up today trafficking?
Which drugs were people trafficking on the drug arrest today?
Yes.
Chief? You know, Derek? Cocaine. Powder? You know how much? Powdered cocaine. And if it was 11 people arrested, that is what we would consider also a gang that is formed for the purpose of the trafficking of drugs. And then in that particular gang, like any business, there are tools that they use in order to operate. And guns and violence are just a couple of the tools that are used in that. So there's a close association with that illegal activity of moving drugs and the tools that they use in order to ensure that their business is successful. Is that?
Okay.
That would be a violent gang.
Trish Malloy asked, how many of the confiscated guns or guns used in violent crimes were purchased legally by the perpetrator?
How many guns used in violent crime were purchased by the person committing the crime legally? We don't have that. She says we don't have that stat right now, but we can get it. I will say this, one of the things that we've talked about in Cleveland around the movement of guns that result in them getting into the hands of people who use them in an illegal way is what we call a straw purchaser. This would be like somebody like me who I can legally purchase a gun. I can go through the background check and all of that. And because I could purchase, what, 5, 6 guns? As many as I want. And because I'm not a licensed gun dealer, then that doesn't require me to report who I sell the gun to or do a background check on them, because it would be considered my personal property. And that becomes a major loophole that we talk about constantly, where we have straw purchasers who purchase a large number of guns and they claim it to be personal property. They're not a licensed gun dealer, so they don't have to report who they sold it to or do background checks, none of that stuff. And give you an example, I've said this many times, if I wanted to have a 9mm or 40 caliber, and I had $300-400, I could go out in the street right now, give it to a kid and say, I need me a gun before the end of the day. I probably will have a gun, and either that gun is gotten through someone breaking into somebody's house and stealing it, or it could be through a straw purchaser, or it could be from a kid who took their parents' gun in order to sell it to me. Is that correct? Yes. So the actual number of the ones that have been confiscated that are where the purchaser of that gun could not purchase it, I would suspect that's very minimum. I suspect it would probably be around 0, because when you go to a gun store or someplace like that, they will have to do the background check and they'll have to do some other stuff. So many times it's either through theft or through the straw purchaser that person gets the gun.
So this isn't a question, but it's a statement. Police aren't allowed to chase and not use the helicopter. Criminals have free reign in the city. A lot of these criminals would have been caught if the chopper was in the air.
Statement, no question, but I'm assuming it is begging an answer that the police are not allowed to chase or to fly the helicopter, and that these things would not happen if the police were allowed to chase and if the helicopter was in the air. You make some assumptions that are not correct, and I will let the chief explain them. The police are allowed to chase. They're just not allowed to chase on a minor traffic violation. If in fact there's a felony that's been committed, then the police are allowed to chase under certain conditions and keeping in contact with the supervisors, or if in fact there's a traffic violation and from a check of a license, the found to be a felony warrant associated with that vehicle, then that could happen. In terms of the helicopter, that's another question that I'll let the chief answer.
Yes, Mayor, I think you answered most of it. You know, our officers are allowed to chase. Specifically for violent felons, carjacking is a violent felony. The cars that were taken over the last week or so, those cars are in our system as being taken in an aggravated robbery. If an officer spots that vehicle, attempts to pull that vehicle over, runs the plate, it's going to come back as such, and that officer is authorized to pursue that vehicle if it doesn't stop. So, you know, we've talked about this notion about you can't chase vehicles here in the city of Cleveland, and it's just not true. As far as the helicopter, our helicopter is up and operational. We actually have 2 helicopters. One helicopter is down right now for maintenance. We're getting that taken care of, but our helicopter is up. As you remember, we had about a month ago a rash of carjackings on the near west side. And those officers, once they exhausted everything they thought they could do on the streets, they actually employed the helicopter, which resulted in several individuals being captured in relationship to carjacking. Again, it's a tool that we have. Officers know that they can use that resource, especially our detectives, and they use it when necessary. But again, we do chase cars here in the city of Cleveland all the time.
And I will add that the condition of the chase is based on whether or not you're putting someone's life in danger, and particularly the public.
Jim Nelson from Channel 19. Do you believe the city is still a safe city overall? And what concerns do the mayor and police department have regarding the public's faith in the job of the police department?
Public space.
Faith in the job of the police.
Well, what I believe is not that relevant, to be honest with you, is the facts that speak. Right now, the city of Cleveland has challenges in terms of crime, and particularly violent crime. And so in that respect, if you're in a neighborhood that is not accustomed to crime, and you have an uptick there, then your quality of life is affected. If you have live in a neighborhood where crime is more prevalent, but it is more intense and more violent, then you got a problem. So in that sense, we're not comfortable. This is fact, what I believe. These are the facts of the situation. And under those facts, then we do have a problem, not just in Cleveland, but throughout this country in terms of crime, particularly violent crime. And again, we deal with the ramification of federal and state policy. It plays itself out on the ground in local communities. And this is just not the city of Cleveland. This is our suburban neighbors also. The last part was what? About faith? Faith?
Just about the faith that
Read it.
the faith that the residents still have in the
Well, in
police
terms of whether or not the public has faith in the division of police, that's a question you will have to ask the public. I'm not avoiding it. I just can't speak for them. I will say anecdotally, I've yet to have anyone tell me that they don't want the police in their neighborhood or community. I've yet to have anyone tell me that they want, just like the previous question to me was, why am I trying, I'm paraphrasing, why are we hamstringing the police and we won't let them chase? Inaccurate statement, but that's what they perceive, that's what they believe. Why are we using a helicopter? Inaccurate statement, but that's what they perceive, that's what they believe, right? So I've yet to hear the people say that they don't want the police, and particularly in neighborhoods where crime is more prevalent. And in those neighborhoods where crime is not as prevalent, they also question why don't we have a stronger police presence? So now, if your question is around, do they have faith in the police in terms of their ability to address crime? That's another question, and that goes to my statement around our police, all local police are really dealing with the ramification and the challenges of state and federal policies where they're playing themselves out on the ground that makes it more difficult for local police departments and divisions to enforce the law and do it in a way that is safe to them, and do it in a way where they are not overly anxious because of the violence in a particular area, and do it in a way that is respectful to that community. So all these challenges are happening, but if you go to the various communities and ask them, and I'm pretty sure you get a wide range of comments.
Okay, Mayor, the next question is changing the subject slightly.
Mm-hmm.
Tracy
We
Carlos.
got to change the subject. So what
Tracy
is it?
Carlos from Channel 5.
Uh-huh.
How is the city/police department preparing for the verdict in Minnesota should protests happen in Cleveland and turn violent?
But how is the city of Cleveland preparing for the verdict in Wisconsin?
The verdict
If it goes in such a way that people protest and become violent. We try to stay ready. Dealing with protests is not new to us. We stay on our game in regards to that. And the police department and the safety director, along with our emergency operation people, are in constant conversation around what they anticipate will happen. So I'm pretty sure the chief has some preparations in mind as to what will go on. If it's just mere demonstrations that are peaceful, that's people's rights. If it goes awry in terms of violence and destruction of property, then that's another approach to life that will also call for us to call in additional assets, whether it's the National Guard or our suburban partners, to come and assist us to deal with that. Anything you want to add, Chief?
Sure. The answer to your question is we have a plan in place. The plan actually starts today with having enough resources engaged to make sure that, like the mayor says, whether it's a peaceful protest and people come down and exercise their constitutional rights, or whether things start to go left of center. We're prepared for anything and everything from that point to the end and in between. And, people need to be rest assured that, May 30th was an aberration. And I don't want to jinx us to say it can't happen again, but we are prepared for anything and everything that could happen in the city, not just here in the coming weeks with the verdict coming down, but as we go forward. And I think we demonstrated that after May 30th, because we had protests the same size as May 30th that happened in different parts of the city. And our officers, along with our partners and our community engagement folks, handled those protests, and there were too many issues that came out of those protests. So we are prepared for anything and everything that could happen coming up here in the near future.
And Chief, there's a follow-up from Jack Shea from Fox 8 News, where he asked specifically what lessons were learned from the protests in downtown Cleveland on May 30th, and how would that influence the city's response to any civil unrest? Thank you.
Well, again, Jack, we went through that. We did an entire press conference on May 30th in the after action report, and we talked about the things that we learned. A lot of those things were put in place shortly thereafter with the presidential debate held here in Cleveland. And again, we had protests the weekend after May 30th, large protests of over 1,000 folks, and then a couple protests after that. And again, the lessons learned from May 30th were put into place then, and those things are still in place right now.
Specifics, you're not sharing anything?
Well, I can't get into great detail, but our personnel have been through constant training. And just so folks know, before May 30th, we were actually training for large-scale civil unrest events in January, February, almost into March of 2020, before the pandemic hit, and we had to scrap a lot of that training due to the things that were happening around the country. So we constantly train for things like that as well as other things, and we've been in that training mode ever since. We had a training just last week with a lot of our bicycle officers. We train on a constant basis with the other officers that are involved in the protests. We're revamping our policy as it relates to civil unrest and protests and First Amendment activities to make sure that everybody's clear, make sure that everybody's constitutional rights are protected, but also to make sure that our city is safe.
The next question is from Ed Gallick from Fox 8. He starts by stating he's requesting an on-air camera interviews regarding 2 public records requests. And he says tens of thousands of dollars in weapons and ammunition purchased for the Department of Utilities Police. This can be arranged in person, but he would like to discuss the purchases, the need for them, and the usage of them.
Well, Ed Gallick demanding an in-person interview with the mayor or the chief or somebody, and that's not going to happen. You can take whatever I say on this and you can air it. It's in person to the entire city of Cleveland and all media. But in terms of the question around the purchase of ammunition and weapons by utility department?
Utilities Police Department.
And utility police department, I can find out if you are specific about what you're asking, we'll get that information to you. I do know that I think it was last year sometime, there was some purchase made by utility police, some of which we rejected, if I'm not mistaken, and some of which we did not reject. So I don't remember the specifics of it, but if you give me a specific question, then we will have a specific answer for you.
Okay, Matthew Richmond from IdeaStream. This question is for Mayor Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
A new campaign to put ultimate oversight of police discipline decisions made by the chief of police and the public safety director into the hands of the Cleveland Community Police Commission launched today. Do you support making the Community Police Commission permanent and using it to establish civilian oversight of police discipline and policies through a charter amendment?
I hope you heard the question. I guess there's an initiative started today around changing the charter that will require the police commission to have oversight over the police department in terms of policy and civilian oversight and I guess direction. Basically, I guess what they're talking about is that they would become the police chief. You know, they have an initiative, and their initiative is to change the charter. I'm opposed to the charter change that they're proposing. We have a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice and is overseen by Judge Oliver in the federal court. And that is what we agreed to, and that's what we abide by. And the police commission is part of that, and its role in terms of policy and oversight is described very specifically in that settlement agreement. So that's why I support the settlement agreement.
This question is from Jack Shea at Fox 8 News. What is the city's plan to respond to the potential civil unrest once a verdict is reached in the Chauvin case, the trial that's in Minnesota?
I think the question is, what is our specific plan to respond to, I guess, a negative verdict in Chauvin case? I think the chief answered that question. He basically said that we are preparing for all alternatives from peaceful demonstration to non-peaceful, and that we'll deal with it as it comes. But we are prepared, and we have officers going through training associated with that.
Another question from Angel Garcia regarding a helicopter. Why is the helicopter not frequently seen flying during regular patrol, i.e. flying around
Why isn't a helicopter seen just flying around
during regular
doing,
patrol?
I guess, all day or at night, regular patrol? Chief, why is the helicopter not flying around all day or all night?
Well, we can't fly on.
Or regular patrol?
During regular
Again, we have 2 helicopters. One is down for maintenance right now, which we're working on. The other helicopter does fly. You may not see it all the time because it's not always hovering directly over neighborhoods and buildings and things like that, but the other helicopter does do regular patrols throughout the city.
Mayor, this is
And I would suspect, Chief, that is also depending on what's going on.
Yes. And then if they're getting called for service, depends on a lot of things.
So they don't do,
Weather.
so they don't basically do just like a routine ride around in the sky.
Sometimes, when they have time for that, yes.
Sometimes,
Yes,
but they usually respond to specific incidents. Is that what you're saying?
correct.
Okay.
We have one more question. The next question is from Ron Regan. Ron Regan asks, this is Ron Regan with News 5. Are city department heads and public information officers free to provide on-camera interviews without approval from the mayor?
Are people, is the communications division allowed to do, approve on-camera interview without my approval? We have, the quick answer is the communications department does not need my approval. Our approach is to do it the way it is now. I know it is to your benefit, whether you, no matter what TV station you are, that since you have a camera, that is to your benefit if you get a live person in front of you so that you can say, I have the mayor, I have the chief, I have the director, I have this. You can get all the information you want by this mode of communication. And you can use whatever footage you want out of this mode of communication to put on the air. And if there's a director you want to talk to in regards to a specific thing, then the same thing applies.
That's the last question.
Is that the last question?
That was the last question.
Well, I better be quiet before someone asks another question. Is there any other questions? Before I have I don't even have, speaking about on-camera interview, I don't do in-person meetings pretty much anymore. I got a phone meeting now with the county executive he's a little delayed now because we're doing this press conference. So don't feel bad as if I'm just denying the media on-camera interviews. That's not it. I just don't do them. We're still in the middle of a pandemic, and I got my shots, but I'm still practicing what I preach, and that is that not only should you get your shot, you should do the prevention stuff. And I stay as far away from social gatherings and other gatherings as I can stay away from. And I don't even go to live press conferences, let alone individual interviews. I just don't do it. You can get the information this way. When this is over with, then we'll be back to normal. Anything else?
Yes,
Oh,
a resident
A
got in
resident.
there. Mr. Adam Fishman, do you have any comment on Ohio Supreme Court suspension of council member Ken Johnson, and why didn't council act on their own?
Do I have a comment on the suspension of Councilman Ken Johnson and by the Ohio Supreme Court, and why didn't council act? No, I have no comment on suspension of Councilman Johnson by the Ohio Supreme Court. I'm pretty sure that Councilman Johnson will deal with that with his attorney. And in regards to why didn't council act on something, that's a question to council, not to the administration. But no, I don't have a comment on that suspension.
And Ron Regan posted a follow-up.
Okay, what you follow up, Mr. Regan?
Your office denied an interview with Public Utility Director recently. Why?
I don't know. You have to ask whoever denied it. You want to know why did my office deny an in-person interview with you and with our Public Utility Director? I don't know. And your question is, do I have to prove it? I didn't know that they had done that. So the answer is no, I don't approve. I'm not the one who says yes or no to that. And then you have to ask someone else why it was denied and why, or did they give you the information that you requested, even though your mode of media and communication is a camera and a TV, did you get the information that you requested? Now, if you didn't get the information you requested, that's another issue. Having someone talk to you on camera is another issue, and I didn't approve it or disapprove it. That's the first I've heard of.
And that's the last one.
I thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.